You can have you. Main event of the evening. Ready to race to you. These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we will be discussing Season 4, Episode 19, Graduation Part 2.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Graduation Part 2.
We open at Fonzie's apartment, where Fonzie is pushing Richie, Potsy, and Ralph to study more, despite three of them being exhausted.
You don't pass the hygiene test, you don't graduate, dig it?
Richie says Fonzie's right. Then, as soon as Fonzie goes into the bathroom, puts a chair in front of the door so they can escape. It doesn't work, as Fonzie just comes back in through the entrance right as the guys are trying to leave. The next day, Joni is trying to get Howard to let her car date. She's a sophomore now, and he said she could as soon as she was a sophomore. Marion says, now's not the time to ask. Howard is worried about Richie's test. Marion is too.
It's just that when I worry, I cook, and when you worry, you eat. That's why we have a happy marriage.
And that's why you have a happy tummy.
By the time you car date, you're going to be wearing support hose.
In come Richie and Ralph, but not Potsy, whose foot is stuck in the car door, and they lift up Joni while chanting about hygiene.
1, 3, 5, 9. Who do we think is 95? Hygiene! Hygiene! Hey!
They pass the test, and they can graduate now. Ralph almost got an A, but he thought a larynx was an animal that attacked sheep. Potsy runs in, belatedly chanting. Fonzie joins them, carrying a notice that says he also graduated, but he's not happy, because he's receiving his diploma in the mail, after working his way through night school.
And now they want to send me my diploma in the mail, like I was a dear occupant.
While he's no dear occupant, he's valedictorian of his class, and he's going to be in that ceremony. He storms upstairs. Richie says that after all Fonzie has done for them, he's not going to let them get away with this. They'll get every senior in school to sign a petition. Later at school, Richie, Potsy, and Ralph give Vice Principal Connors the petition, and Richie explains that Arthur Fonzarelli has just graduated from night school, and they want him in their ceremony. Connors says it's out of the question.
Night school students must receive their diploma in the mail.
As the guys try to change his mind, Principal Haley runs in to tell Connors he's convinced the mayor to deliver a speech. Connors says that isn't possible. Students of Fillmore High School tore up their gymnasium during a lecture on juvenile delinquency. So, they're using Jefferson High's gym for their graduation ceremony. As a result, they have to be finished by 6 o'clock. Haley says the mayor is out, and adds,
that's how to make a decision. That's why I'm principal.
Richie appeals to Haley to let Fonzie participate in the ceremony, and despite Connors being against it, Haley is all for letting Fonzie sit with the class. Haley leaves, and Connors says Fonzie can sit with the class, but he can't receive his diploma there. It's already in the mail. Before he leaves, Connors scolds the guys for wearing the street shoes in the gymnasium. Fonzie enters, looking for Principal Haley, and Richie gives him the good news. Fonzie is touched that they did this for him, and leaves to work on his speech. He is the valedictorian, after all. Ralph demands to know if Richie is a loony. Fonzie can't give a speech at the ceremony, and he's not getting his diploma there either. Richie doesn't want to spoil this for Fonzie. It's just a time problem. They just have to speed up the ceremony. Potsy says not to worry. He'll think of something. Ralph says this is no time for a first. The day of the ceremony, as Richie's getting ready in the Cunningham living room, there's a ring at the doorbell, and Fonzie's cousin Spike answers, there to see Fonzie graduate.
Hey, I wouldn't miss this for all the marigolds in Milwaukee.
He brought a wreath. He gets a discount at the florist where he works. Marion answers the door, and there's Fonzie, already in his gown. He greets Spike, and Marion compliments Fonzie.
Oh, Arthur, you look so smart in your cap and gown.
Howard takes a picture of Richie, Fonzie, and Marion together with his new camera, which develops a picture in 60 seconds. Then he accidentally pulls out the undeveloped film. Al arrives, and asks for Howard to take his picture with everyone. Howard cannot.
No film.
Wow, that is new.
Al offers to take everyone to the ceremony in his catering truck, but Howard says they're taking his DeSoto. Joni says she'll go with Al, as does Spike. Al calls them a cute couple, even though Joni is deeply annoyed by Spike. Richie tells Fonzie he doesn't have to wear the gown yet. Fonzie replies that he worked hard for this, and he's going to wear it every minute he can. He's going to walk to school in it even. Richie points out that it's pretty warm out, but Fonzie says as he leaves, he'll be fine.
I am naked underneath this.
As Howard and Marion are about to leave, Richie takes a moment to reflect. The next time he walks into the room, he'll be a high school graduate, a completely changed person. Marion says he'll always be the same person to them, but Howard agrees that Richie will be changed. Richie adds he'll have new responsibilities, and he'll have to be more adult. A girl calls for Richie outside to take a ride in her new car, and Richie happily declares,
Holy moly, that's Susie!
and runs outside with a refrain of Blueberry Hill. Marion starts to cry. Their baby has grown up. Howard says Marion did a terrific job raising him, and Marion adds that Howard helps her too. Howard adds that with Joni, he thinks they're in big trouble. At Jefferson High, everyone is sitting down for the ceremony. Marion tells Joni to just think. In 3 years, she'll be up there on stage.
Do you think by then Dad'll be able to work the camera, Mom?
Then in comes Arnold, who shakes hands with the Cunninghams and then Al. He asks Al how business is, and Al says it's the best movie ever made. Those kids keep him young. Arnold realizes this means Al's not making any profits.
No profits, huh?
Not a cent.
Yeah, I know it is.
The ceremony begins. Principal Haley welcomes everyone and introduces Vice Principal Connors as the host for the rest of the ceremony. Meanwhile, Richie reminds his classmates to speed everything up for Fonzie. Richie also reminds Ralph to make it fast when he gives out the class awards. Ralph says he will, after his comedy routine. Richie says there'll be no routine, but Ralph says he'll just make it fast and only do the punchlines. A sped-up pomp and circumstance plays. And everyone runs on stage. Connors is baffled, and Richie explains they thought it would go faster if they saved that for the end. Connors announces Popsy, star of the class musical Hell is a Poppin', will be singing the school song. He sings the entire song in under a minute,
Hail Jefferson High School, the blue and white we love.
but it still manages to make Marion cry. Ralph Mouse is next up to announce the winners of the class awards. He rattles off a bunch of punchlines without setup.
Anyway, so we bid him. How the elephant got in my pajamas, I'll never know. And the man says, I can't hear you, I got a banana in my ear.
Then gives out the drama award and stops the recipient from giving a speech. Then gives the award for most congenial to the girls who tied and tells them to figure it out off stage. When Richie steps forward to give his valedictorian speech, Connors asks why everything is going so fast. Richie just says there's no need to thank him before giving an extremely abridged speech. Richie then announces that since they have some extra time, the valedictorian of the night school, Arthur Fonzarelli, will be giving a speech of his own. Fonzie thanks Richard, his very good friend, and his fellow graduates. He says that 3 years ago, he dropped out of high school to get away from all the rules.
Don't wear your taps on your shoes.
Don't ride your bike up and down the hallway. I thought to myself, who needs this, you know?
Everyone said he was cool, but quitting things is definitely not cool. Some of the smartest people he knows have high school diplomas. Finishing school gives you a sense of accomplishment, a thumbs up for the future. That's why Fonzie went back to night school, and why he stands before everyone, wearing a dress. In conclusion, staying in school is cool, and you should do whatever you can in order to graduate.
Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
Everyone applauds. Richie gives Fonzie a present from the entire senior class. A chair that says, valedictorian, night school. Fonzie loves it. Since they're now 2 minutes ahead of schedule, Richie gives the rest of his valedictorian speech, during which he mentions that it's nearing the end of the 1950s, so I have no idea what year this is taking place in. The students are given their diplomas, and Richie tells Fonzie to snap his fingers when the time comes. After Richie gets his diploma, Connors refuses to announce the night school class, so Principal Haley announces the night school consists of one graduate.
Arthur Fonzarelli.
Fonzie snaps his fingers, and a mail carrier comes in to give Fonzie his diploma, and Fonzie walks down the aisle with the rest of his classmates.
Thank you, Peter. That was Graduation Part 2, which first aired back on February 15th, 1977. That night, Happy Days served as the lead into a brand new Laverne and Shirley, in which the girls go looking for Shirley's father. CBS had another episode of its news magazine, Who's Who, and on NBC, Pappy was caught between two warring generals on a brand new Baa Black Sheep.
The immortal Baa Black Sheep.
Graduation Part 2 was directed by the one and only Jerry Paris, and it was written by William Bigley and Michael Warren. They were both staffers on Happy Days. The most recent of their co-written episodes that we covered was Beauty Contest. As for guest stars, well, we have Danny Butch making his final appearance as Spike Fonzarelli. Just a reminder, Danny got out of acting in the 1980s, reverted to his real name, Mario Della Casa, and made and sold Genie bottles based on the show I Dream of Jeannie. If you really want to see him do some more acting, he has a small role in 1981's Yes, Giorgio, the one and only attempt to make Luciano Pavarotti a movie star.
Now, Luciano Pavarotti in his motion picture debut, Yes, Giorgio.
So, Peter, what did you think of Danny Butch as Spike Fonzarelli?
It was kind of nice seeing him in the role again for one last time, and it was really nice having confirmation that he was still interested in flowers, even if most of his screen time consisted of him kind of creepily hitting on Joni and her not being interested.
Yeah, this episode actually kind of reminded me what I didn't like about Spike Fonzarelli. I feel bad kind of saying that because a lot of Happy Days fans are fond of Spike Fonzarelli and they have these fond memories of that character, but I'm not sorry to see him go.
We'll be sorry when Shachi shows up.
Yeah, I guess so. It's the devil you know versus the devil you don't know.
Everything is relative.
Yeah, it gets worse. Pat Morita returns as Arnold. Pat's show Mr. T and Tina had already been canceled at ABC, but by the time of Graduation Part 2, he was a cast member on Blansky's Beauties, yet again playing Arnold. Any thoughts on the reappearance of Pat Morita as Arnold?
It's always wonderful to see Pat Morita, and this is no exception. And I also really loved his little exchange with Al, where he's able to pretty much instantly tell that Al's not making any profit. I love it when Happy Days just takes a moment to get really dark and admit that Arnold's Drive-In is kind of a shitty restaurant and it doesn't make any money because most of the teenagers don't actually buy anything.
That is a moment of honesty in this sitcom world. I noticed that Pat Morita is doing his bah-ha-has a little bit more often than normal this week, and I think it might be because Arnold is losing his mind. So he does his little, psychotic laugh a lot of times during this show.
Are you implying that Blansky's Beauties is just a hallucination that Arnold is having?
No, just that the experience on Blansky's Beauties is weakening his strength. It's weakening.
He's time traveling?
Yeah, between the 50s and the 70s, as is Nancy Blansky. Nancy must be time traveling because we saw...
Yeah, and so is Pinky Tuscadero.
All that time travel between the 50s and 70s, it really takes a toll on your mental state. Obviously, Dick Van Patten reprises his role as Vice Principal Marvin Connors from Part 1, but we talked about him last week. Jason Wingreen is our high school principal, Mr. Haley. A Brooklyn native, Jason had a long, busy career as a character actor in TV and film from the 50s to the 90s. Audiences today probably remember him best as Dr. Brody of the Mayo Clinic in Airplane.
This is Dr. Brody at the Mayo Clinic. There's a passenger on your Chicago Flight 209, a little girl named Lisa Davis, en route to Minneapolis.
And as the original voice of Boba Fett in The Empire Strikes Back.
He's no good to me dead.
But he had recurring roles on All in the Family and Matlock. You may have seen him on Seinfeld, Star Trek, Twilight Zone, Columbo, Charlie's Angels, and God knows what else. Gary Marshall used him again on Blansky's Beauties. Jason Wingreen lived to be 95 years old. So, Peter, what did you think of Jason Wingreen as Mr. Haley?
He was a really fun foil to Connors, who is this hard-nosed, very rules-obsessed martinet, whereas Principal Haley, you get the sense that he just wants everyone to be happy and get along, so he just kind of goes along with whatever Connors tells him. And at the same time, maybe he's a little bit aware of that and it scares him, so he pretends he has more agency than he actually has, as shown when his response to finding out that the mayor can't give a speech after he just convinced him to is to say that, oh yeah, he's out, and it was totally my decision and not at all because of the circumstances.
I thought Mr. Haley and Mr. Connors actually had an interesting relationship where Connors is supposed to be the secondary person, but he obviously is exerting a lot of power from that vice principal role.
And at the same time, you've also got Principal Haley wanting Fonzie to take part in the ceremony and being the one to announce him being there and being part of the night school. So you kind of get the sense that maybe, just maybe, Principal Haley is just a little bit sick of Vice Principal Connors' shit.
Yeah, this is the moment when maybe Mr. Haley starts to take control again of Jefferson High and wrench it away from the evil clutches of Vice Principal Connors. Now, this was a special episode because longtime Happy Days extras Debbie Chaffin, Sally Hightower, Heather Warren, Hillary Horan, and Walter Van Heen all get to play characters named after themselves.
Heather Warren, Sally Hightower, and Debbie Chaffin.
Walter Vaughn, Hillary Horan.
Debbie's name is twice mispronounced Chafin when it's actually Chaffin. I've been mispronouncing it as well. And Walter's name is shortened to Walter Vaughn. Another extra is identified as Mickey Wheatley.
Mickey Wheatley.
This guy turns out to be kind of crucial in Happy Days history. He goes back all the way to the beginning. He's the one who's pretending to comb his crew cut in season 1. That dude.
God.
And in this one, he plays the piano during Potsy's school song. In Marion Rebels, he was the guy who delivered the note to Richie from Marion in the bathroom.
Oh, wow.
And we'll be seeing Mickey Wheatley again next week. Jerry Paris' son, Anthony Paris, plays another Jefferson High graduate.
Anthony Paris.
He became an associate producer on Laverne and Shirley a few years later, and so you get to see him as one of the graduates.
Well, Lottie frickin' da!
I'll have to ask you about this. Paul Link is credited as Bruiser, but that character appeared nowhere in the episode that I could see. Bruiser will be in Last of the Big Time Mouths later this season. Was Bruiser in your version of the episode?
He was not. Maybe he was in a deleted scene.
That's what I thought, that maybe Bruiser's scene hit the cutting room floor. As for songs this week, well, Blueberry Hill is sung by Ron Howard. We have Pomp and Circumstance, March No. 1 in D, written by British composer Edward Elgar in 1901. The famous trio section has traditionally been played at graduation ceremonies since June 1905, when it was played in Elgar's honor at a Yale graduation ceremony.
You, sir, have the boorish manners of a Yaley.
And Hail Jefferson High School is performed by Anson Williams, and it was seemingly composed especially for this episode. As for cultural and historical references, the book that Richie is reading is Hygiene, Today's Health Guide. It looks like the props department simply stenciled the word hygiene onto a copy of Today's Health Guide, a very real book published in 1965 by the American Medical Association, so that's a real book. I had to do a deep dive into the history of no-dose.
No-dose is as safe as coffee and effective in helping you to stay alert if you feel drowsy or fatigued.
Because no-dose is mentioned. No-dose is a popular line of caffeine pills currently marketed by a company called LDSP, which acquired the brand in 2017. Each pill contains about 200 milligrams of caffeine, about the same as in a cup of coffee. It's tough to say when exactly they were invented. I found an ad in a November 1960 issue of Life magazine. The term no-dose pills, in lowercase letters and in quotation marks, goes back to at least 1947. By the late 1950s, it's definitely become a capitalized brand name. The larynx, mispronounced larynx by Donnie Most, is another name for the voice box. It's a muscular organ in the top of the neck. It holds the vocal cords and manipulates the pitch and volume of the voice. I think the joke about it being an animal that kills sheep is a reference to the lynx. It's another way of saying bobcat. And Ralph would be right. Lynx do attack sheep. It's actually quite a problem in England and Norway.
That one joke made me think that maybe the reason Ralph specifically failed the test the first time around is because he can't resist making dumb jokes on his exams.
That was a long way to go for that pun, I guess, if you're so committed to rather strained puns that you even need to make them on exams. The practice of moving the tassel from the right to the left is a relatively modern tradition in America, indicating that a student can now claim title to an academic degree. It takes the place of another older tradition called hooding, in which graduates would receive hoods with different colors signifying different academic disciplines. There are a lot of jokes in this episode about Howard's newfangled instant camera. The first such camera, the Polaroid Model 95, was developed by scientist Edwin Land and it debuted in 1948. The earliest instant cameras did use roll film, as we see here, but eventually in the 1960s, Polaroid switched to what's called pack film. The invention was inspired by Edwin's daughter, Jennifer Land, who asked her father why she couldn't see a picture right after it was taken. There are two flags brought onto the stage at the beginning of the graduation ceremony. One, obviously, is the American flag. This one would have had 49 stars since Hawaii did not become a state until August 1959.
Wait,
and I don't think...
Well, wasn't there already the Hawaii becoming a state party back in an earlier season?
There was, but Hawaii became a state in August 1959. Richie says we are approaching the end of the 1950s.
As we are nearing the end of the 1950s.
So I would have to imagine that their graduation ceremony must be taking place in what, May or June? So we're several months away from Hawaii becoming a state.
So this is yet another case of time having no meaning on happy days.
Exactly. The other flag is the state flag of Wisconsin, which shows a sailor and a miner holding up a gold shield with a badger on top. It's a very busy flag they have down there. Mr. Connors compares Pomp and Circumstance to the Charleston, which refers to both a dance and a lively piece of jazz music. From the 1920s. It's also mentioned in Fonzie Joins the Band. The orchestra plays Pomp and Circumstance at 122 beats a minute in this episode. The norm seems to be about 88 to 90 beats a minute. The Charleston is somewhere in the middle at about 105 beats a minute. In contrast, Potsy takes the school song at 200 beats a minute. So that's like speed metal tempos that he's taking. Mr. Connor says that the class musical was called Hell is a Poppin'.
Hell is a poppin'?
What he means is Hell's a Poppin'.
Hell's a poppin'. Oh, Satan's on a tear. Hell's a poppin'. They're screaming everywhere. She's an inferno and vaudeville. Anything can happen, and it probably will.
The Madcap musical review that ran on Broadway from 1938 to 1941. In 1941, the show was adapted for the big screen with Shemp Howard, Martha Ray, and the comedy team of Olson and Johnson. The wild, surreal Hell's a Poppin' is sometimes cited as a precursor to Laugh-In, Monty Python, and Saturday Night Live.
Maybe Hell is a Poppin' is like an unauthorized knockoff of the school did.
I think the joke here is that Mr. Connors is such a square that he can't say the slangy Hell's a Poppin' title.
So yeah.
President Andrew Johnson was impeached by the House of Representatives in 1868 for a variety of reasons, most notably his attempt to replace Secretary of War Edward Stanton with Brevet Major General Lorenzo Thomas in flagrant violation of the Tenure of Office Act of 1867. To date, no impeached president has actually been removed from office. In listing America's assassinated presidents, Richie names only Abraham Lincoln and William McKinley, assassinated in 1865 and 1901, respectively. He skips right over James A. Garfield, who served only 6.5 months before being slain by Charles Guiteau, the notorious disappointed office seeker who felt that Garfield's death would unite the Republican Party.
As someone who was kind of obsessed with Charles Guiteau in high school, I was very disappointed.
And one of the unseen graduating seniors, strictly off-screen, not even shown, is named Fred Silverman. This is a nod to the real Fred Silverman, who was president of ABC at that time.
Fred Silverman had an extraordinary career heading up the entertainment divisions at all three networks of the day, CBS, ABC, and NBC. His knack for picking successful shows led Time magazine to dub him the man with the golden gut.
Other observations this week, the idea to have Richie graduate from high school actually came from Ron Howard. When he signed on to do Happy Days, it was one of his stipulations that Richie graduate and not remain an eternal high schooler. He was worried about being typecast as a kid due to his years on the Andy Griffith Show. Joni says that she's a sophomore now, but Marion says Joni will graduate in 3 years. So my guess is that Joni has just completed her freshman year of high school and now considers herself a sophomore, even though her sophomore year won't begin for another few months.
Yeah.
Is that what you thought too, or what do you think?
Yeah, that's definitely what I got from it.
It was nice continuity, as you said, remembering that Spike works at a florist shop and is interested in flowers. Maybe the reason he was written out of the show is that his essential conflict had already been resolved, and there wasn't really anything else to say about Spike.
Probably, yeah.
For a petty dictator, Assistant Principal Connors is surprisingly laid back and calm through all of this. He seems like a potentially nice guy, just one who has a very particular idea about how things should be.
He's a dick, but he's not going to, ruin the graduation ceremony just out of spite, even though that probably would have been kind of funny if he did.
Did Fonzie say that he was wearing taps on his shoes?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard about it before, but that just sounds uncomfortable. Wouldn't that hurt?
I looked into this, whether or not non-tap dancers ever would wear taps on their shoes. I asked around on Twitter and Facebook, and I got some feedback about it. And people said that, yes, certain people would wear small taps on the heels and soles of their shoes to keep their soles from wearing out.
Okay.
And sometimes juvenile delinquents in the 1950s would wear taps on their shoes just to make noise and chaos wherever they went. So that is a real thing. As Fonzie became more and more of a role model for children, his status as a high school dropout became more problematic. So here we have him giving a big stay-in-school speech, which is a real contrast to the 1976 novelty song, The Fonz Song by the Hayettes, which starts, What do you think? It was my opinion that Fonz was giving this stay-in-school speech because he's now a role model to kids, and you can't have the role model dropping out of school.
Oh, 100%. I have mixed feelings about it because on the one hand, this is probably the apex of kind of domesticated Fonzie so far, but on the other hand, I think it's really, really sweet. And I like seeing Fonzie be so genuinely happy and invested in this and proud of himself for doing something that he thought was difficult. And he's right that you should finish school however you can. Even if you dropped out, you can still go back and get your diploma. But at the same time, it's hard not to see this as the writers basically taking Fonzie and kind of neutering him to make him more palatable to a mainstream audience. So, there are two wolves inside of me.
I had mixed feelings about it, too. I think part of it is that Henry Winkler took real ownership of the Fonzie character, and he took it very seriously that his character was a role model and that kids were emulating him. So he tried to be very responsible with being a role model. That's a tricky thing. If you're a character on a sitcom, but you also are being emulated by kids across the country, Speaking of Fonzie, we are getting ever closer to Correctamundo. This week, it's Coolamundo. Sometimes it feels like they're just teasing me, and we're never going to get...
It's coming, I promise. You're not just imagining things. It is coming.
So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
Honestly, the only one that really stuck with me was Fonzie telling Richie that he was naked under his graduation gown. That's an interesting thing to tell your best friend, Fonzie.
I will say that this is one of the rare episodes that I remember very well from being a kid and watching it in syndication, and it was that line that I remembered. That scene, for some reason, just burrowed its way into my brain. I remember that he was naked under the graduation robe.
And he really wanted Richie to know that, for whatever reason.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old, timeless question. Was this episode any good?
Absolutely. This episode really feels like the conclusion of a long-running arc regarding the Fonz, and sort of the central tension of his character as of Season 3, which is, here's this character who is this dangerous hoodlum who over time has become more domesticated, more associated with the Cunningham family, who eats his veggies and pals around with Joni and calls her shortcake and is explicitly Richie's best friend. And he's explicitly a high school dropout, but as of this episode, that's no longer true. He went back and he got his diploma, and I think it was done pretty well. I think that it's really sweet how genuinely happy and proud of himself Fonzie is, and how genuinely happy and proud of him everyone around him is, especially Richie, who goes to all of this effort so that Fonzie can take part in the ceremony with the rest of the graduating class, because Richie genuinely cares about Fonzie so much, and he respects him so much, and he wants him to be able to show himself to the world the way he wants to be seen, and that includes causing chaos at the ceremony, just so that Fonzie can also give a speech. And that's really, really sweet.
I thought this was a really sweet episode, too. It's very sentimental. If I didn't know better, I would swear that this was a season finale. It felt like that.
Yeah, it's weird that it isn't. It just keeps going after this episode.
I enjoyed it a lot. I was glad to see Arnold back. I liked the idea of a really fast graduation ceremony, because high school graduation ceremonies are so incredibly slow and boring. They just seem to drag on forever. And because I was in the band, I started playing at graduation ceremonies from like 7th or 8th grade onward, so I attended a bunch of them.
Oh, wow.
And they are incredibly slow and boring.
Especially if you don't know anyone who's graduating.
Exactly. So that was my fantasy, to be able to play Pomp and Circumstance, at this incredibly fast tempo and, have everybody just clamber onto the stage really fast and not march really slow. So that was appealing to me. And yeah, this is an important milestone for Fonzie. And I really like how Fonzie takes genuine pride in his accomplishments, as he should. Graduation Part 2 was very enjoyable, and I think it's a must-see for all fans of Happy Days. This was one definitely not to skip. Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Sphericals. That's SFERICALS.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysareours.libsyn.com, and they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysareourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, wacky military hijinks in The Physical.
Sounds like a boatload of laughs. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Don't wear your taps on your shoes.